Eurasia Group is out with their biggest risks for 2020, and the research firm predicts Iran will remain a, quote, boogeyman for the U.S. The new report reads in part, quote, the U.S.-Iran relationship will be deadly and geopolitically destabilizing. Lethal skirmishes in Iraq between U.S. and Iranian forces are likely to come as well. Joining us now to discuss is Eurasia Group global macro analyst Leon Levy here with us in studio. And Leon, when we look at this, I mean, the report also notes tensions with Iran will put a minimum of $5 to $10 when we talk about premiums on oil prices this year as well. We've been talking about that risk. But what about it specifically? I mean, you guys raised geopolitical risks back in 2019 as well. What about it is different facing this year?
Well, what's different is we've had another year of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is still feeling his way across the U.S. presidency, and most of the countries in the world that the U.S. interacts with is having to figure it out as he does as well. And so what happened with Iran just last week was a disproportionate response. It doesn't seem like the Iranians were prepared for such an escalation. Truth be told, from the reports that are coming out, so a lot of U.S. officials did not expect that escalation as well. And so now everybody is basically figuring it out as they go along. So that includes the Iranians, it also includes the Americans. And so the question then becomes, what are the Iranians going to do in response to the U.S. provocation? And it's still early days. They're still trying to figure out. We saw yesterday they made some announcements about the nuclear deal, which a lot of U.S. media outlets reported as them sort of deciding to walk away from the nuclear deal. It's not actually as simple as that. They're going to maintain the international inspectors. So they're trying to give themselves as much leeway as possible to respond. The real question for them is, what does Donald Trump do in response to that?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I guess it would make sense, really, the way that we've seen this play out right now, that geopolitical risks would be on top of mind for a lot of Americans watching the show right now. But what's interesting is your report also notes a number one risk that I don't think a lot of people might consider, and it's unique because we don't really talk about it. I guess we did last election, but the 2020 election, also a concern, according to your report, which notes that, quote, we face risks of a U.S. election that many will view as illegitimate, uncertainty in its aftermath, and a foreign policy environment made less stable by the resulting vacuum. Obviously, election security has been top of mind when we talk about Facebook and some of these other tech companies, but what specifically about the election is so risky in 2020?
So again, this comes back to the point, like, what has changed from last year's report? It's another year of Donald Trump, right? So it's another year of political polarization. We've also had the development of impeachment, right? And impeachment is itself very much a political process. But the way that it's played out so far is that the Democrats, feel that the Republicans are going to try to quash the impeachment no matter what, so they're not going to get a fair shake in that regard. And then just as concerning for Democrats is that both Donald Trump and the Senate Republicans don't seem particularly interested in taking the steps needed to shore up the country against foreign election interference. So from the Democratic side, they will feel like this election was effectively rigged for that. Republicans, should they actually not win, might turn around very well and make the same exact arguments that the Democrats are making, which is that, oh, there are foreign elements here and this election was stolen from us. I mean, to this day, Donald Trump has not really, acknowledged that he lost the popular vote, right? So it's kind of difficult to imagine that he would graciously concede in 2020 should it come to that. So either way that we're looking at it, at least half the country is going to feel like something was not right with this election.
Aside from some of the risks that we've just mentioned now being the forefront now as we head into 2020, we still have U.S.-China trade tensions still lingering in the background, still some Brexit uncertainty, still Hong Kong tensions rising and escalating. And so would it be errant to really say that these are fading into the background? Do you see these re-escalating, or is it time to sort of shift our focus to some of these other concerns?
So when it comes to China specifically, it's, again, we are just continuing in this same phase of not knowing what comes next. And after 2-3 years of Donald Trump, the Chinese have woken up to the understanding that no matter what happens, they will always remain vulnerable to the U.S. when it comes to the tech sector. And so they've started this decoupling. And this decoupling is actually our top risk number 2. But that opens up to the broader U.S.-China trade tension. So while we start with technology, technology, it's going to move into other fields, into national security, into economics, into trade, which it's already started, but it's really going to grab hold. And we saw glimpses of that with the NBA brouhaha, right? Where suddenly it no longer just becomes about technology or about trade, it becomes about cultures and values. And increasingly, we're going to see this play out over the next year and for the decade to come.
What does that do to the average American, though, right? Because it is exciting to watch, I guess, skirmishes between the NBA commissioner and the leader of a sovereign state like China. However, when it comes to how it might impact someone watching the show, I mean, what does that mean when you think about globalization and how big that trend has become if the U.S. and China were to move further and further apart?
Well, obviously, globalization would take a hit, and by and large, that means the majority of people in the world will be worse off than they normally are, because globalization is a force for good. It allows for the efficient allocation of resources, people. All that said, globalization has obviously hit the rocks with a lot of people in the United States, particularly in the middle of the country, who might see this and root on President Trump and his taking on China. And there are some good arguments to be making for that. But at the end of the day, from an actual financial perspective, what this trade war is causing is goods to be more expensive for the American people. So the American people, whether or not they realize it at the moment or not, are feeling the effects of this trade war in their actual pockets.
Yeah, and no doubt the biggest reason, I would say, why we saw him back off that last wave of tariffs to end the year, for sure, when those were about to go into affect consumer goods as well. But Leon Levy, thank you so much. Eurasia Group's list of the top 2020 risks. Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.